The following reflection is entitled The Red Heifer and the Coherence of Numbers. It was first published on the Anchored Argosy, my free Substack. To many of its readers, the Book of Numbers might feel like rummaging around in the attic of the Pentateuch, filled with assorted odds and ends that did not fit in elsewhere. Law, narrative, ritual, texts about the division of the land, and much else are jumbled up together, and it is difficult to discern any unifying themes or logical coherence. In this case, initial appearances can be misleading. Closer examination reveals rich thematic unity in the book, and textual connective tissue where most presume that it is absent. A while back I interviewed Michael Morales about his wonderful new commentary on the book, within which he explores many of these commonly neglected features. Morales suggests that an overarching theme of the book is the camp. The book of Exodus concluded with the construction of the tabernacle and the descent of the Lord's glory upon it, establishing the tent as the Lord's dwelling. However, it is in the book of Leviticus that we see the tent of dwelling become the tent of meeting, as the Lord establishes the sacrifices and the work of the priesthood. Numbers takes things a step further, ordering the rest of the people in a war camp arrayed around the tabernacle. The children of Israel are a people defined by the fact that the Lord dwells in their midst. However, this proves to be less pleasant than it sounds. Due to their unfaithfulness, the Lord strikes them with plagues, his anger breaks out against them, the earth swallows up rebels. By the end of Numbers 17, the people don't know what to do, as we read in verses 12 to 13 of that chapter. And the people of Israel said to Moses, "Behold, we perish, we are undone, we are all undone. Everyone who comes near to the tabernacle of the Lord shall die. Are we all to perish?" Yet one would think that the camp of the Lord is where you would want to be. God is the God of life and holiness, and life in his camp is defined by these things. The problem seemed to be that the Israelites Moses was leading were a people touched by death and characterized by unfaithfulness, and the closer they came to the Lord, the more the volatile incompatibility of death and wickedness and life and holiness became clear. You want to be in the realm of life and holiness, yet what if you are sinful and polluted by death? Behind this, Morales and others suggest that we can hear the narratives of Genesis 2 to 4. The camp is like the garden, where the Lord walks in the midst, and man enjoys fellowship with him. Outside is the realm of banishment, where man, like Adam and Eve and later Cain, is judged, excluded from the source of life, returning to the dust in death. To be sinful and touched by death in the presence of God is to be liable to judgment. Recognizing the thematic unity that the camp gives to the book in general is very illuminating. However, there are also threads that bind seemingly disparate sections together. One example of this is the tassels law in Numbers chapter 15, verses 37 to 41. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God." At first glance, the tassels law seems to be randomly situated. However, to those who read more carefully, it is immensely important and ties up with much in the context, to the failure to enter into the land, to the looming question of Israel's fate, and the passages that follow. The tassels law alludes to the rebellion of chapters 13 and 14. They are not to spy out, rendered as follow in the ESV as are quoted, after their own heart in verse 39. This is a key word of chapters 13 and 14. The tassels recall the rebellion at Paran, where Israel heeded the unfaithful spies and failed to enter the land. Among other things, the tassels function as a cautionary memorial of it. Its allusion to whoring after their heart and eyes also recalls things such as the law of the adulteress in chapter 5. They must be rededicated to the Lord, like the Nazarite of chapter 6 who contracted unholiness from a dead body, learning the lesson of the adulterous and holding fast to their holy status. The tassels that mark Israelites out as holy connect them with the garments of the high priest. There's a word play between the word for the plate, zitz, on the high priest's forehead, which reads holy to the Lord, and the tassels, zitzit, on the corners of the Israelites' garments. The cord of blue also evokes the garments of the high priest in Exodus 28 and the sanctuary items that were covered in blue cloth in Numbers 4. The implication that every Israelite is holy also leads naturally into the accusation of the rebellious Korah in chapter 16 verse 3. You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? The tassels law thus segues between the rebellion at Paran and that of Korah. Wordplay between zitzit and zitz also connects the tassels law with the demonstration of Aaron's authority with the blossoming rod in Numbers chapter 17. The blossoms of the rod, like the plate on the high priest's forehead, is referred to using the term zitz. The connection between the almond blossoms and the plate on the forehead of the high priest also highlights the symbolic association between the high priest and the lampstand. With the tassels, the blossoming of Aaron's rod frames the rebellion of Korah. The holiness of all the people is asserted, while responding to Korah's protest. The tassels law thus allows for a very fluid movement from the failure to enter the land to the resolution of Korah's rebellion. Furthermore, the placing of the tassels law, also when we consider its juxtaposition with the execution of the Sabbath breaker that precedes it, is noteworthy due to its implicit narrative location, following the Great Rebellion in refusing to enter the land. In its narrative situation, it serves to reaffirm Israel's holy status. Despite their failure, the Lord has not rejected his people. They can recall and reject their past rebellion against him and cleave to his covenant. They are still a holy people dedicated to the Lord. Here I would like to consider another example of a strange law or ritual that accomplishes an important purpose in its situation in the text of Numbers, the ritual of the red heifer. I have already noted the importance that Morales gives to the theme of the camp in the book of Numbers, something which assists us in interpreting the red heifer ritual, which is about re-entering the camp after corpse pollution. Besides this broader theme in the book, there is the more immediate context provided by the aftermath of the rebellion of Korah, most notably the fear of the people on account of the holy presence of the Lord in the tabernacle at the end of chapter 17. Pollution by contact with a corpse, a situation for which the red heifer ritual is designed, is mentioned previously in the context of the law of the Nazarite. The Nazarite vowed himself to the Lord, but the text describes something going awry. Someone died near to him, and the Nazarite has to undergo a purification ritual and begin his vow again. This, in miniature, is the story of Numbers as a whole. Israel vowed themselves to the Lord as his holy army. However, they were polluted by death and had to undergo a period of exclusion before being cleansed and starting again. We are not used to rituals and sacrifices. They seem bizarre and foreign to us. There are, however, worse ways to think of them than as effective enacted prayers. The sacrifice acts out through symbols the spiritual reality of what is happening, and through a faithful acting out, the prayer is answered. As the New Testament makes clear, there is nothing about the symbols in themselves that makes them effective. It is not that the blood of bulls and goats can take away sin, but God who promised to answer such enacted prayers. In Numbers chapter 19, the ritual of the red heifer is instituted. This is easily one of the strangest of all the rituals of the law. Besides several strange features of the rite itself, we might well wonder what it is doing in its current position. One of the questions that is presented to us by this ritual is whether it should be understood as a sacrifice. While Gordon Wenham argues that it is not a sacrifice, Jacob Milgram argues that it is. In verse 9, it is described as a purification offering. Yet in contrast to typical purification offerings, none of the animal seems to be burnt up upon the altar. The part that is burned is incinerated outside of the camp in a clean place. Nevertheless, there are important similarities with the logic of the purification offering. We find the relevant law of the purification offering in Leviticus chapter 4, verses 4 to 12. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and lay his hand on the head of the bull, and kill the bull before the Lord. And the anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull, and bring it into the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord, that is in the tent of meeting. And all the rest of the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all the fat of the bull of the sin offering he shall remove from it, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them, at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver that he shall remove with the kidneys, just as these are taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. But the skin of the bull and all its flesh, with its head, its legs, its entrails, and its dung, all the rest of the bull, he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, to the ash heap, and shall burn it up on a fire of wood. On the ash heap it shall be burned up. In the case of the regular sin or purification offerings for the people, the priest can consume the sacrifice. The priest's holiness trumps the uncleanness, as it were. This does not, however, apply in the case of the sacrifice of purification for the priests themselves, which, besides the portions presented on the altar and the blood, must be incinerated outside of the camp. The blood of the red heifer is not offered on the altar because it is an ongoing purification, as Milgram observes. The purification offering can defile those who handle it. And this is similar to what we see in Leviticus chapter 16, verses 23 to 28. The purification sacrifice absorbs the impurity that it purifies, and must therefore be eliminated. While these things purify, those who handle them are in danger of contracting impurity from those things that purify, because purification offerings bear the impurity that they remove from people. Something of this logic can be seen in Leviticus chapter 6, verses 24 to 30. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is killed shall the sin offering be killed before the Lord. It is most holy. The priest who offers it for sin shall eat it. In a holy place it shall be eaten, in the court of the tent of meeting. Whatever touches its flesh shall be holy. And when any of its blood is splashed on a garment, you shall wash that on which it was splashed in a holy place. And the earthenware vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. But if it is boiled in a bronze vessel, that shall be scoured and rinsed in water. Every male among the priests may eat of it. It is most holy. But no sin offering shall be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place. It shall be burned up with fire." In consuming the sin offering, in Leviticus chapter 10, verse 17, the priests are said to bear the iniquity of the congregation. They are able to absorb in some sense that impurity and to overwhelm it on account of their holiness. However, the impurity contracted by something that is used to make atonement for the holy place is too great and so cannot be consumed without contracting an overwhelming impurity. Perhaps the best way to understand the red heifer ritual is as a portable purification offering. The application of the water for impurity does not need to be performed by a priest or Levite. The presentation of the blood of the animal and the preparation of the ashes needs to be performed by the priest, but this creates the materials that can be applied by an Israelite layperson at some later point. This would also serve the practical purpose of allowing for someone excluded from the camp to participate in a sacrificial ritual. Why is a red heifer used for this ritual? The red heifer would be the largest female animal within the sacrificial system. The ashes that it produced would be able to function for much of the population. Within the laws of the sin or purification offering, the bull represents the priest and the whole congregation. Using a red heifer would distinguish this purification from that purification sacrifice. Female animals were used as the purification sacrifices for laypersons, and this was one such sacrifice. The redness of the heifer seems to strengthen the connection with blood, as does the use of red cedar wood and scarlet yarn. The word used for red, adumah, also likely puns upon other Hebrew words. It puns upon the word for blood, dam, and also the words for man, Adam, and earth, Adamah, all things with which other associations could be made. These connections are likely significant. Before the animal is burned, some of its blood is taken by the priest and sprinkled 7 times towards the tabernacle. The 7-fold sprinkling of the blood is similar to other blood rituals. For instance, the blood is sprinkled with the priest's fingers 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil of the sanctuary, in the purification offering for the priest or for the whole congregation in Leviticus chapter 4. Blood is also sprinkled 7 times in a similar manner on the Day of Atonement, and also as part of the ritual for the cleansing of lepers and for leprous houses. The blood of the animal is not brought inside of the tabernacle, perhaps because the impurity in such a case does not extend as far into the tent as it would in the case of an impure priest. The parts of the animal that are incinerated to obtain the ashes are the same parts of the animal that are burned of the purification offering in Leviticus chapter 4. Nothing here is said about the parts of the animal that would typically have been offered to the Lord. To the parts of the animal that were incinerated, the priest had to add cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet yarn, elements that recall the ritual for the cleansing of lepers in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 3 to 7. Then, if the case of leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood, and the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. The leper has something of the character of a living corpse, so it should not surprise us that there are similarities between the process for the cleansing of the corpse-defiled person and the cleansing of the leper. The items added to the burning red heifer also recall, like the elements of the ritual for the cleansing of the leper, the Passover. Cedar wood recalls the doorposts, the scarlet yarn recalls the blood on the doorposts, and the hyssop with which the blood was sprinkled upon them. The account of the Passover in Exodus chapter 12, the ritual for the cleansing of the leper in Leviticus chapter 14, and the ritual of the red heifer in Numbers 19 are the only 3 occasions where hyssop is mentioned in the Pentateuch. In the ritual of the red heifer, as in the ritual for the cleansing of the leper, the blood is applied not to the objects of the tabernacle, but to persons. We should bear in mind that the objects of the tabernacle often symbolize persons in some way, so the application of blood to tabernacle items could be seen as the symbolic application of the blood to persons. Why these 3 cases? Perhaps because each of them involves a sort of movement from death to life. The Passover is deliverance from the death of Egypt into new life as the people of God. The ritual for leprosy cleanses someone from the death of exclusion from the camp and the impurity of a skin condition that has death-like characteristics. And the law of the red heifer cleanses someone from corpse pollution and exclusion, bringing them back into the life of the camp. Blood was not usually applied directly to individuals, merely to objects representing them. However, there were various exceptional occasions where blood was applied directly to individuals. In the initial establishment of the covenant in Exodus chapter 24 verse 8, Moses cast blood on the people. In the priestly ordination ritual, blood was applied to the extremities of the priest's bodies. A similar application of blood occurred in the ritual for the cleansing of the leper. The ritual of the red heifer has, as Milgram notes, similarities to the ritual of the Day of Atonement, which was, with the 2 goats, an intensified form of the purification sacrifice. It also has similarities to the ritual for the cleansing of lepers. However, in contrast to both of these rituals, There is no dispatching of one animal into the wilderness or open field. The application of blood to the bodies of persons should also be considered in light of the different foci of impurity. Many of the purification rites are principally dealing with ways that the sanctuary and its objects have been rendered impure as a consequence of the people's behavior, not so much the impurity of the people themselves. The impurity of the leper, the corpse-defiled person, or the person with a bodily emission, is an impurity of their own bodies, not an impurity of the tabernacle caused by their actions. Consequently, some form of purification needs to occur on their own bodies, not just on the tabernacle objects. The deep strangeness of this ritual suggests the possibility that there is a deeper symbolic import to what is taking place, perhaps that, like the ritual of jealousy, it relates to events in Israel's own history. Animals in the sacrificial system have their particular type stipulated. They must be of the herd or the flock, or goat or sheep. Often the sex of the animal is stipulated. It must be a male of the herd or a female of the flock. Not infrequently, we also see the stipulation of the age of the animal, of the first year, or perhaps a mature animal. The red heifer is exceptional in being an animal whose colour is stipulated. And as we've already noted, besides the colour associated with blood, the word has connotations. The cluster of associations I mentioned earlier between the redness of the heifer, the earth, the man, and blood might bring us back into the world of Genesis 2-4. Adam, the man, is created out of the Adamah, the earth. In chapter 4, Cain's shedding of his brother's blood leads to banishment. In the ritual of the red heifer, we have allusions back to the exile of man from the realm of God, from the garden, to the defiling character of blood, as we see in chapter 4 in the story of Cain, and to the way in which man returns to the dust and to ashes. As human beings, we are but dust and ashes. When we die, we are reduced to those elements. In this chapter, the ashes of the red heifer are referred to as both ashes and also as dust in verse 17. In being associated with blood and with dust and ashes, in an especially pronounced manner, the red heifer ashes could be regarded as a sort of symbolic distillation of death. Recognizing such associations, Joel Heumann argues that there is an analogy between the tabernacle and the Garden of Eden. Both are sanctuaries of the Lord's dwelling. Banishment from Eden in Genesis placed man in the realm of death. Banishment from the camp, or the promised land, involves a similar sort of death and alienation. The story of the beginning of Genesis might also be recalled in the emphasis upon the third and the seventh day. The third day recalls the third day of the creation, where the land is brought up out of the waters, and the seventh day recalls the Sabbath, the rest, and the completion of the creation. Reflecting upon these connections further, we should consider the way that chapter 19 is situated within the larger book of Numbers. Why is the institution of the ritual placed here? The answer to this question, as Heumann argues, will be found by considering the narrative context. He writes, "But intentional juxtaposition is the key to its placement. The red heifer itself thematizes the narrative at this point. The wilderness is preeminently a place of death for Israel, which must die to be reborn. The heifer, as a symbol of the old generation Israel, is reduced to dust in the wilderness. By means of the ashes of the heifer and living water, the one contaminated by death is restored to a living relationship with God, even as the new generation is transferred from the wilderness to the land of promise. The heifer immediately foreshadows the impending final elimination of the old generation and symbolizes the promise given to the new. Future life in the land will replace the pervasiveness of death in the wilderness." Heumann's argument can also help us to understand this chapter as filling the great gap in the book of Numbers, a jump from the second year of the Exodus to the conclusion of the 40-year period of the wilderness wanderings. The ritual of the red heifer is a symbolic representation of this entire period. The dying off of the old generation, connected with symbols of the initial Exodus and Passover, will lead to the cleansing of a new generation and the entrance into the land. In the next chapter of the book of Numbers, the key figures of Miriam and Aaron die, and the imminent death of Moses is also declared. After their deaths and the dissolution of the whole original Exodus generation, the people will finally be prepared to enter the Promised Land. The death of Miriam and its connection with the miraculous provision of water that follows. Numbers 20 contains the first such provision of water mentioned since Exodus 17, which answers a water crisis that seems to arise directly at the death of Miriam, might suggest further associations. Perhaps Miriam should be associated with the red heifer, her death providing a sort of atonement. This might also be related to the way the death of the high priest ended the banishment of the manslayer, as we see in Numbers chapter 35, verses 25 to 34. Morales suggests the possibility that there might be allusions to the ritual of the red heifer in places like Ezekiel chapters 36 and 37, where sprinkling the purifying water of the Spirit is followed by the raising of the people's bones. The ritual of the red heifer is also mentioned in Hebrews chapter 9 verses 11 to 14, where the efficacy of the blood of Christ is compared to the much lesser efficacy of the ashes of the red heifer. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God? The blood of Christ does not merely overcome banishment from the camp, as the red heifer does, but opens up a new and living way into heaven itself. However, there is another twist in the way that Hebrews presents Christ as the fulfillment of the purification offerings. In Hebrews chapter 13, verses 10 to 14, we are told, "We have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come." If entrance into heaven comes through the provision of purification and the overcoming of death in resurrection life, the movement out of the camp suggests a different direction of movement, a movement out into death and banishment. In Hebrews, Christ does not die so that we might not have to, but in order that we might participate in his once-for-all efficacious death, dying with him and rising to eternal life. This movement out of the camp is our dying with Christ. Those who undertake this movement are assured of its associated movement into heaven itself. If you'd like to read this and other such reflections for free, you can do so on the Anchored Argosy Substack. If you'd like to support my work here, there, and elsewhere, you can do so using my Patreon or PayPal accounts. The links to those are in the show notes below. God bless, and thank you very much for listening.